Hi everyone! Welcome to today's video. So as promised, I will be starting the series where I work my way through this beautiful Watercolor with Me in the Forest book. If you have not already seen it, I do have a full separate video flipping through this entire book and just giving a little bit more of some background information. So if you would like to check that out first, then I recommend doing that. I will go ahead and just work my way through the book chronologically, just one prompt at a time. So without further ado, let's go ahead and jump right in. I have my book ready. I have a couple of watercolor brushes, some fresh paper towels, my water over here, as well as my watercolor palette. So if you also have this book, or if you will be doing some separate watercoloring on the side, or if you are journaling, then please go ahead and grab your supplies and let's go ahead and get started. Alright, so I will go ahead and list all of the products that I am using in the description box below if you are curious. But let me go ahead and just flip open the book here. So my plan for today is to go ahead and start with the try it section, and then I will go ahead and move on to the actual first prompt, which will be the acorns. But first I will start off with the practice of the wet on dry technique. I just did a little bit of shifting around of my items here just so that I can get this page into view. Just as a reminder, there is a master color chart included in the beginning of this book. The artist of this book, Dana Fox, then her brand of choice when it comes to watercolors are the Winsor & Newton, and so she does have a list of the Winsor & Newton watercolors that she would recommend for this book. However, I am using a St. Petersburg White Nights watercolor palette. I'm just going to try my best and recreate the colors that she recommends on this page. And you can do the same thing if you are also making your way through this book, or just with any watercolor piece that you do. If you see something online that you want to recreate, then you by no means need to get the same exact products. Just use this as a reference, and then it can also be a very good opportunity for you to practice color mixing. So flipping forward to the try it for the wet on dry, it just has a little description about the wet on dry technique on the right hand side here, and then it just says on the opposite page, fill in each square with a mix of your paint and water. Start with a very diluted mixture, more water with less pigment, and gradually increase the amount of pigment, less water, in each box. So we'll go ahead and start with that. As you can see, there are some examples included from the artist, so I think I will go ahead and just pick a different color and try the same technique. I'm just taking my number 6 round brush from the Princeton Velvetouch line of brushes. I'm just saturating my brush with some water first. I think I will go ahead and do this Indanthrene blue. Don't know if I'm saying that correctly, but it's just a very beautiful blue. I'm just going to take some on my brush and then just transfer it to the palette here. And then because this very first box has to be very diluted with water, then I'll go ahead and just add a little bit more water to my brush. Basically clean the brush off of any pigment, and then I will go back into the color here and just roll my brush in it so that it is nice and saturated. And I think with that, then I will go ahead and just fill in this first box here. Alright, so now that that is done, then the next box, then you'll just add slightly more pigment and slightly less water. So I think I'll just go back into this little puddle that I've created, just slightly drag a little bit more of the pigment into that puddle, and just work my brush into it. So my technique is not quite as nicely blended as the example. You can see a little bit more texture from the brush strokes, so That is definitely something that I would like to work on throughout this book, but it is just slightly darker, just with a little bit more pigment compared to the first one. For the third box, then I'll just do the same thing, just add even more pigment to the last and slightly less water. So I'll go ahead and wet my brush again. Just drag more of this color out. Alright, so there is that square. I think that having this page is a very good way to start practicing the technique, just as a little warm-up before you actually dive into the projects. Now for the darkest box, then I will go ahead and just take more of that paint. It is a little bit more difficult to get a nice blend when you are doing the wet on dry technique. So it can end up just looking a little bit more patchy and a little rougher. I'd say that that is good enough for those boxes. I think perhaps for this page it would have been a good idea to use a slightly larger brush, just because I felt like for the number 6 round brush then it took a while for me to fill in these large boxes, and because of that the water is already drying into the page and not allowing you to drag the color across and create a smooth or seamless blend. Alright, now for this circle down here, then it says to fill in the circle with a single light color, let it dry completely, now apply a second layer onto the bottom half to see how building layers can increase the intensity or darkness of the painting. Just taking some quinacridone rose, and then I'm just going to dilute it with water so that it is just a nice light wash on the page. Sorry if you hear some noise in the background. My 2 cats are playing together, so they are scurrying around and having the zoomies, which might be a little noisy in the back, so sorry about that. Alright, so I will try my best to be fast with the circle. Because I don't really want it to dry too much. Alright, so now that the circle is dried to the touch, then I will go ahead and just add a second layer right on top, just to create a little bit of intensity for the second half of the circle. So again, just re-wetting my brush, taking a thin layer of the same shade, Alright, now this is completely dry, so this page is done. I have to say, I definitely know that I need a little bit more practice with this technique, so I am looking forward to starting on the very first prompt, which is the acorns. So just taking a look here, then the colors that I will be needing are the yellow ochre, raw umber, and burnt umber. So it looks like I do have yellow ochre. I do not have raw umber, but I do have a burnt umber. I think for the raw umber, since it is a little bit more of that warmish tone, then I perhaps might just mix a little bit of some burnt sienna and a little bit of English red, which are in my palette, to achieve this same raw umber look. Just to read over the acorns page, acorns have a lot of texture to them. Using shadows, highlights, and lines to mimic that look is what you'll try to do here. By using different shades of brown, you'll create layers of wet on dry washes to really build up those darker areas. The bottom half of the acorns should appear streaky like the texture of a real acorn. So I've already listed the 3 colors that you'll need. The supplies would be a round brush, size 6 works well, and then 3 colors of paint, which are the ones up here. Step number 1, working on the bottom half of the acorns first, fill the areas with a light wash of raw umber mixed with yellow ochre. Alright, so moving on to the left side of the page with the actual sketches. I will go ahead and just pick up some of the yellow ochre first, just because I do have that shade. So I will pick up a nice amount on my brush. And sorry if I sound a little congested. I've just been really sick lately and it's been kind of a pain to get rid of. So I apologize if there's any sniffling in this video. I will try my best to edit it out. Alright, so this is the color that I've mixed up. So I'll go ahead and just saturate my brush with that, and then I will go ahead and just add a layer to this bottom part of the acorn. Now, if this is your first video of mine that you are seeing, thank you for watching and welcome to my channel. I don't consider myself to be a watercolor artist or anything like that. I do like to use watercolors in my bullet journal often, but there's definitely still a lot to learn, so that's one of the reasons why I wanted to pick up this book, so that I can get outside of my comfort zone and paint things that I typically wouldn't paint. And that way, hopefully it will just challenge me to learn some new techniques that I may not be familiar with, or paint things that I otherwise wouldn't. So now that this is dry, it says to add a second wash of the same color. Try to mimic the streaky texture of an acorn by painting light lines from the top of the area to the bottom point. So with that, I will go ahead and mix up some more of the color since I used quite a bit for the first layer. So I'm just taking the yellow ochre once more, and then for the raw umber substitute, then I was just mixing in a little bit of burnt sienna as well as the English red. Just add a little bit more water just to wash it out a little bit. And this time we want to mimic the streaky texture, so we'll paint lines from the top of the acorn to the bottom. So okay, so there's that one. Go ahead and do the same thing for this one. Now, I'm not sure how thick or how thin the lines should be. It doesn't really say. But I guess we will see how this looks in the end. I would assume maybe the thinner the lines, the better, since it'll just add a little bit more definition and texture. Sorry, I went to go grab a sweater because I was getting pretty cold in here. So now that this is relatively dry, then it says to add another layer using burnt umber around the bottom, top, and sides of the acorn. You can blend any harsh edges out with water. So I will go ahead and just re-wet my brush, and then I will take the burnt umber shade, just mix that into my palette here. So I'll go ahead and just kind of line it along this angle here. I'll go ahead and clean my brush off and then drag out the already existing streak. Now, if I'm being honest, I'm not too confident in what I'm doing right now. I'm curious to see how this all turns out. I know the directions say to blend out harsh edges with water, but when I do that, then it also removes some of the pigment, which I don't really want. So then it kind of creates an uneven, patchy look. So I think I'll probably just add a little bit more down here. Okay, so I think I will go ahead and just leave it at that, and I will let that dry and then just move on to the next step. So now that the bottom halves are dry to the touch, then the next step is to fill the acorn tops with a light wash of burnt umber, and then apply additional layers as you did previously, darkening shadowed areas such as the center and sides of the tops. So I'll go ahead and just take more of the burnt umber, and then apply a light wash to the top. Now, I can honestly say I don't think I've ever painted acorns before in my life, so this is a first for me. I'm just taking a little bit more of the burnt umber and just using that to add some shadows and definition. I'm using more loose motions for the acorn tops just to add a little bit more of that rough texture. Okay, so now that that layer is pretty dry, then it says to create a scale-like pattern in the top of the acorns with a thin brush tip and burnt umber. So we'll go ahead and just take more of the burnt umber, and then I guess it's just kind of like a crisscross shape. It's looking pretty light. I should maybe add just a little bit more pigment in some of those areas. And just defining the little stem a little bit more so it doesn't blend in too much. Alright, so those were all the steps to complete the acorn look. There are some resemblances that I can tell, but then there are also some differences. So something that I thought of while I was working on this piece was, if you are more of a visual learner, you can refer more to the actual image here on the right hand side and just basically look at that and copy it to achieve a similar look, or you can follow the directions. I personally was focusing more on her directions rather than looking at the example. So I do feel like there are some differences. I focused a lot on adding the brush strokes and the texture to the bottom part of the acorns I can tell in hers that there does seem to be a little bit more dimension and color variation in the body. There are some parts where it's a little bit lighter with the yellow ochre and then deeper with the burnt umber, and then just some varying areas with the raw umber, which I don't feel like translated very much in my painting. But I think the nice thing is that it doesn't look like an exact replica of her acorns. This definitely looks like something that I would probably paint just as is, because I do tend to add more details and a little bit more definition to my pieces. I think that this represents the way that I like to paint, but I do acknowledge that I do have some more practicing to do. It's still somewhat of a learning curve. I think also this is my first time painting on this paper, so being able to see how it reacts to the paint as well as the water, now it kind of gives me a good idea moving forward. I feel like the page absorbs water relatively quickly, and so because you're doing this wet on dry technique, it's better to work fast if possible. But yeah, the last thing I'm going to do is just date this. So today is October 7th. For some reason, I've always just really liked dating things that I do, like drawings, prompts, paintings, whatnot, just to be able to look back on in the future and just kind of see like my progression over time. That is it for the first episode in this series of me working through this Watercolor with Me in the Forest book by Dana Fox. I hope that you guys enjoyed this video. Let me know if you have any tips or suggestions in future videos in this series. I would love to hear your feedback and just make this more of a collaborative effort, since I am always on a journey of improving my drawing techniques, my watercolor and painting techniques. So I am very excited to be on this journey with you, and I would just love to hear your guys' feedback and opinions. So yeah, let me know if you tried doing this acorn prompt yourself. How did it turn out? Let me know down below. Thank you so much for watching. I really hope that you enjoyed it, and I will see you in the next one. Bye!